Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of Jimmy Giardiniera, the SQL Extraordinaire. 2 weeks in a row, building some consistency. Look at that, look at me, shout out me. This week, we're gonna look at problem 2474 on Leetcode. This is a hard database problem, and the title of it is Customers with Strictly Increasing Purchases. Yeah, let's dive right into it. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll read the problem statement, see what they're looking for us to solve. We'll take a look at the tables and we'll see kind of what our output is expected to look like through the example. And that should give us a good idea of kind of how we want to approach the problem. So, customers with strictly increasing purchases. Write a solution to report the IDs of the customers with the total purchases strictly increasing yearly. Kind of vague, kind of weirdly worded, I'd say. The total purchases of a customer in 1 year is the sum of the prices of their orders in that year. If for some year the customer did not make any order, we consider their total purchases 0. So that's kind of interesting. So say you purchased in 2016, you didn't purchase in 2017, but you did purchase in 2018. 2017 is 0. So even if it increased from 2016 to 2018 when you actually transacted, 2017 being 0 breaks that. So that person wouldn't count. The first year to consider for each customer is the year of their first order. The last year to consider for each customer is the year of their last order. Return the result table in any order, and it's in this following example. So as we can see here, we have an orders table with each order ID, customer ID. We really only care about the customer ID here. Order date, well, we only care about the year, and then price. Output in this scenario is only customer 1. The reason being, I have a phone notification. I'll shut that off. The reason being, actually, let me cancel that here. So let's quit phone link. I just started using phone link. I think it's kind of cool, but the notification's kind of gonna annoy. Anyways, so customer 1. So in 2019, they spent $2,300. That increased in 2020, it increased in 2021, and it increased in 2022. Customer 2, this is that scenario we talked about. Because there's a 0 in 2016, this person doesn't count, even though it is increasing in the 2 years they did transact in. And then customer 3, it was the same amount in both years, so again, doesn't count. So only customer 1 here is returned. So let's jump into the query. So I think the way that I'm going to approach this problem is through a series of CTEs, common table expressions. It's a way that we can kind of like massage and add some criteria to get to a more specific data set that then we can do some aggregations off of. I think it probably will just be the cleanest solution, like the easiest to follow. And so that's the way we're going to go. So the first, what we need to do is we need to figure out for each year in each customer ID, how much did they spend? So that's a very easy, that's a very easy just sum statement. So let's grab the year from our order date table as year. We'll grab our customer ID and we'll grab the sum of the price as yearly rev. Oops, you need a select statement. I can't really be a SQL extraordinaire if I can't even add that. Okay, we're going to do this from the orders table, and we're going to group it by year, order date, and customer ID. So what are we saying here? We are saying we want the year, customer ID, and how much they spent in that year. And we want to group that by the year and the customer ID. So for every customer ID and in every year, give me their yearly revenue. Pretty simple. Now that we have the year, and let's just take a look at it. Select star from yearly orders. We'll run this just to see what it gives us back. It'll fail. That's fine. Okay, so as we can see, for 1, we have 2023, 3,000, 3,100, 4,700. So now we see that this is increasing year over year. So now let's let's make a flag. We'll do a table, and I'll create another CTE here. Increase rev flag as. So if you're going to, the cool thing about CTEs is you can kind of like daisy chain them. So I can leverage what's in this table in my next CTE. If you want to create another CTE, you don't have to include this with. You essentially just throw a comma and then the next CTE name. And so what I want to do now is I want to do for each customer ID and in each year, if, and let me, so what I'm going to, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to join the yearly orders table to itself. That way I can find the current year's revenue and then the next year's revenue, and I can compare to see if it's increasing or not. So what I'm doing is for the current year customer and the current year, when the current year yearly rev is less than next year's yearly rev, then 1 else 0 end as increasing rev flag. And I'm going to do that from the yearly orders table, current year, and I'm going to left join the yearly orders table again as the next year on the customer ID and the current year plus 1 is equal to the next year. And let me do this a little bit so that looks nicer. And I think that makes sense. So let's walk through this one. So for each customer in each year that they're active, if the yearly revenue for that year is less than the next year's revenue, then set the increasing revenue flag to 1. So for example, in the case of customer number 1, 2019, we know that the next year revenue is 3,000. So their flag for 2019 is set to 1, which is good. The reason we're doing a left join here is because there are some customers where they don't have a next year. And in that case, we want it to be 0. Like it's clearly not increasing because they never shopped. So their next year revenue is 0. So we're going to do a left join. That causes the join to be return nulls. And we'll mark that as a 0 in terms of an increasing revenue flag. Okay, so now what do we do with this? We have how much a customer spent, we have what year they spent it in, and we have if they spent more in the next year. And so how do we write a statement that allows us to figure out if they did that for their entire history as a customer? So we're going to create essentially what I'm going to call an aggregate table. So aggregate as, and we'll do select for every customer ID. We're going to do the number of years, count distinct year as years. So this is how long they were a customer for. And we also want to sum their increased revenue flag as, I guess, increased rev sum, for lack of a better term. Not great with naming. Don't ding me for that. And I'm doing this from the increased rev flag table. And we're going to group by our customer ID. Why is this important? So 1, I want to know who the customer is. I want to know how many years they were a customer for. And I want to know, out of those years, how many times was the revenue increasing? And so now I can do a select statement, and this should give me my answer. So if I select customer ID, because that's all we want to return, right? Customer ID, yes. From aggregate, and what do we want to select? We want to select where either years is equal to 1. Why do we want years is equal to 1? If a customer only shopped in 2019, that's increasing. It went from 0 to whatever the amount was. And so that in that scenario would be a customer that we want to include in our result set. The reason why we're doing years equals to 1 is because when they get into this table, if there's only 1 year that they were available, this will return null. And so actually this increasing rev flag will be 0. And so we don't want to include them with the zeros that should be excluded. We want to include them with the result set. So it's a little confusing, but basically for the last year, that's always going to be a 0 no matter what. If it's their last year with us, it's always going to be a 0. But in some scenarios, we want to include that person. And so we're saying, hey, if they've only been with us for 1 year, that's okay. Still bring them in. The other scenario that we want to consider is if the increasing rev sum is equal to years minus 1. Why is this? This is another scenario, again, where because of the last year being 0 here, we want all of their previous year, like any other year that they were part of the, they had an increasing rev, then we want to include them. So what I mean by that is, if we look at user 1, for example, this will have a flag of 1. This will have a flag of 1. This year will have a flag of 1. So now they're up to 3 flags. This year will have a flag of 0. So we're going to count their years. It's 4 years, 1, 2, 3, 4. But on flags, it's only going to be 1, 2, 3. So we want this 3 should be equal to 4 minus 1. So 3 is equal to 3. So that person would work. Does that work in our other scenarios? Let's look at number 2. So for guest 2, they shopped in 2015, 700. But because they didn't shop in 2016, this will be a 0. They shopped in 2017, but because they didn't shop in 2018, this will also be a 0. So they don't fall into years equals 1 because they have a 2015 and a 2017. They also don't fall into this scenario because this is 0 and years minus 1 is 1. So that should give us everyone that we need. And I know that I just butchered this entire explanation, so I will go through it again at the end, but let's run it and see how it looks. It's accepted. Let's submit it. And it looks good. It ran pretty long. We didn't beat a lot of people, but that's okay. That's okay. We'll just spend more money on more compute power. Okay, so let's run through this again just to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page. First thing we want to do, the whole concept of this question is we want to find guests who every single year that they shopped, guests from the first year that they shopped to the last year that they shopped, their yearly revenue is constantly increasing. So they need to have shopped every year in between, and the revenue needs to be increasing. So first, what are we going to find? We're going to find the years that customers shopped, the customer ID, obviously, and then how much they spent in each of those years. Then we're going to do a check to see for each of those years, did they spend more the next year? If they did, set a flag to 1. If they didn't, set a flag to 0. We know that if there is a gap in purchases, so in the case of buying in 2015, buying in 2017, nothing in 2016, that'll be 0. We also know that if you've only shopped in 1 year, or it's your last year, it'll also be a 0 because there is no next year to join on. So we have to keep that in mind when we build our criteria for our result set later on. Then we're going to count the number of years that they shopped. So what's their guest history? And then the number of times that it was increasing. So now we have all the info that we need to be able to come up with our result set. So we're going to select each customer from this aggregate table where either they only shopped 1 year, which we still want to include them even if their flag is 0, or the number of times that it was increasing is years minus 1, because that last year will never be 1. And so if their increasing revenue flags add up to a certain number, the distinct years that they were with us minus 1 should equal that. And so you combine those two groups together, and that gets us our final data set, which satisfies the problem. Again, kind of a confusing explanation. If you have any questions, comments, different ways you would solve it, or just want to yell at me about how I went about that, let me know in the comments. And yeah, I look forward to chatting again with everyone for the next problem next week. Thank you, and have a good rest of your day.